Behind me sits the 2002 Subaru Impreza WRX, and you might be wondering, what's with these old junks? Why are you looking at older cars now? Well, the reality is we're going to start to cover some more of this and why we believe many cars of the 90s and early 2000s kind of were at their best then. But that's going to be a future episode. So let's start talking about this. Now, I guess you could argue the styling. Of course, everybody thinks this was kind of an ugly, bug-eyed looking WRX or Subaru. But, you know, as time went on, people preferred it over kind of the neutered looks. And it's just, again, it's who you are, what you grew up with. This is just kind of a classic, instantly recognizable Subaru because of its quirkiness, of course. Now, it's funny to look at this and you see this was kind of the start of the bulges in the fenders and the weird and awkward lines. It's something that Subaru has clearly struggled with over the years, trying to figure out if they want to do more or less of it. But this maintains a good balance, and I think most people really like it. You have the huge scoop on the front that's wide open to the intercooler, which, of course, with a top-mounted intercooler, you need air there because it heat soaks so much. You know, really, it's just classic 90s, early 2000s looks all over this. No moonroof, kind of this, you know, they were trying to figure out what to do with the spoiler so it wasn't over the top, but it's still a little bit in your face. But, you know, overall, you've seen this a million times. It's just nice to see one that's in good shape. But let's take a look at the interior. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that cars will eventually make their way back to kind of how this WRX was in terms of simplicity, the less is more approach, and it's one of the best parts about this car. It's just not inundated with a bunch of crap that you see in the new cars. Now, in all fairness, Subaru has maintained a level of simplicity throughout their cars. Their interiors are very dated, and it's something, as much as I kind of knock on them after 15 years, you would expect better plastics, better fit and finish, and they've only improved marginally compared to other manufacturers. But what they've done so far is they've still kept the basics, and that's what you see here. An analog gauge cluster that is extremely clean looking. You know, simple cup holder design. You know, everything's right at your fingertips. There's just no guesswork of what things are, where they are, and one of the best parts about this car is its visibility. You don't have a lot of the modern safety structures and the safety nonsense that's in here to kind of, you know, raise everything up, reduce the glass, and it just makes it for a better, more wide open driving experience. It's something really special about the interior of this car. Now, Tom, the owner of this car, has been through a series of vehicles, and more importantly, he's been a mechanic at multiple dealerships and has seen a lot of the nonsense that you deal with modern cars. And he's yet another person I meet that has gone back to the start, gone back to kind of what works, very little drama. And yes, there is a trade-off to this. This feels like a straight-up Kmart interior. There's just no way around it. And a lot of the cars, while they may have been at their peak in terms of like ergonomics in the 90s and early 2000s, it just doesn't, you know, it doesn't exude a lot of quality. And I guess that's the type of thing you're going to have to figure out if you're looking for a car like this. Can you trade off like the glitz and the glam of having kind of a wow factor exterior interior and trade it for just simplicity and probably, in most cases, reliability and ease to work on? So why do these cars have such a big appeal? What is it about them?
Well, to me it was simplicity. The interior was bare bones, and I like bare bones. I don't need any computerized air-conditioned seats or air-conditioned glove boxes or anything like that. The other thing is ease to work on. They are the easiest cars I've ever worked on. Everything swaps. Every model, Legacy, Forester, Impreza, everything swaps. Rear ends, engines, even seats, everything. Everything interior, pretty much. Just it's just amazing to work on these. Amazing cars. I love them.
So there's got to be some type of negative aspect to owning a Subaru. What about the social stigmas?
There's a lot of social stigmas, you're right. I don't vape. I'm not a fuck boy. I'm not a homosexual. Not a homosexual. What else? Yeah, every time someone asks me, hey, you're a mechanic, what does a mechanic drive? I say Subaru. They always go, oh, I didn't know you were gay. It's not a gay car. Maybe the Outbacks are targeted towards adventure-seeking people, but I wouldn't say it's a gay company.
Tom's a mechanic. I've known Tom since we were doing body shots off each other in high school.
Good times.
It was real good times. And so working on all these types of cars, where have you worked?
Dealerships and independent shops. I worked Infiniti, Audi, Fiat Chrysler, Toyota, and I did own my own shop for about 2 years.
Okay, so out of all those cars, what was the worst to work on?
Fiats. I would say Fiats. I cannot believe how cars like that exist and are sold.
All right, Tom, you've put this beautiful piece of machinery on the Bendpak lift. Now, let's talk about the underbody of it a bit. Where do you want to start? In the rear, maybe?
You tell me.
Let's start in the rear.
Tell me.
Okay. What's the difference between the regular Impreza and the WRX of this generation?
Nothing. Except sway bar, rear sway bar diameter. The struts are stiffer. These are actually STI, 04 STI inverted struts.
Okay.
So these are way stiffer. My girlfriend had the RS, and it was totally night and day difference.
In terms of what? Suspension? Damping? Or
damping and cornering and ride. The ride was a lot smoother, that's for sure.
On the RS?
On the RS.
Okay.
I don't know if that had to do with spring rates or what, but...
But this is all original back here? You haven't
all
replaced
original.
The subframe,
nothing,
the diff, nothing?
Nothing. Just the struts and springs.
And why don't you drive this in the winter?
I don't want it to rust.
It looks pretty bad as it is.
Really?
I think so.
For a 2002.
I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not...
This is rust-free practically for Illinois.
How many years did you have it in the rust? Or
I bought it in 2005, and the guy drove it daily from Indiana to Chicago.
Let's be real about Subaru for a minute.
Let's.
My modern 86 that I had looked like a 15-year-old car after 2 winters.
Okay.
It's in the Subarus that I've seen underneath that are driven in the salt, rot out faster than any other car I've ever seen.
Nissans are far
Nissan's worse. Yeah, Nissan's bad too, but Subaru, I don't know what it is.
It's something about Japanese cars. They don't galvanize their steel, or they don't rust-proof. I'm not sure.
All right, we're towards the front of the car. You haven't done anything with the diff or drive shaft, so
Nothing.
you've done the front subframe, you said, though.
Yeah, I hit a curb once. I thought it was just snow, and it ended up being like a curb about that high.
Okay.
And I nailed it, and it bent it. So I replaced that. That was easy, and it was out of Forester, I think.
Okay.
And
it's the same lower subframe for
just
Forester?
This part.
Oh, okay.
It's like a subframe.
Is it the full one-piece subframe, or is it just
this is one piece.
Okay.
So.
How bad was that to change?
Not bad at all. I did it in my garage.
Would you just have to hold the motor up, support the motor?
No, the motor's very supported. Everything's supported.
Okay.
Up there, so just a couple bolts.
Wow,
right down.
It is easy. So what else? Is this original trans, or is this
original
from
trans? Never touched.
Okay.
Still smooth shifting. And that's the other thing, maintenance. Always maintenance. Maintenance, all the time. With Subaru fluids. That's what I believe in. So.
The trans weren't particularly strong on these cars when they came out?
They keep saying that, but I've had 2 of these now, and I've never had a problem.
But you probably don't shift like an asshole.
Exactly. I don't know what all these people are blowing gears out of transes. I don't know how.
I mean, maybe it has to do with modification and power levels
Again,
too.
Yeah.
All right, so what else is there to say about the front half of this car? I mean, it looks like a standard, old school strut suspension.
Simple.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing exotic. If something breaks or you need to replace it, I mean, you don't have to drop subframes or anything crazy to get to anything. Simple, just simple, simple, simple.
All right, we'll start under the hood. What do you got here?
Start off with, this is a 2001 JDM Forester/STI engine. This is not the stock USDM engine. It's actually 9.1 to 1, 9.1? 9 to 1 compression as opposed to 8 to 1 compression. It's a better engine than the US one. I had it tuned to stock, which was 250 horsepower, 250 torque. And that's the number one thing I advise anyone who buys a Subaru. Do not modify it. Just keep it stock. Designers knew what they were doing. Keep it stock.
You know you're going to get people giving you death threats for saying that.
That's fine. That's fine. Let them. But when they're replacing, when they're in their third or fourth engine, and they're like, I don't understand. Why is this thing blowing rings? Why is it blowing smoke? What the hell's going on? Why is it knocking? It's because you put a straight exhaust on it and you tuned it to 350 horsepower. And that's fucking stupid.
But bro, I can get a cab access port and I can get all this power.
That's great. But Japanese are the smartest fucking people on earth. And the car was perfected in the 90s by the Japanese. So if you're gonna say you're 21 and you know more about cars than they do, you're a fucking idiot.
I am heading off in the 2002 WRX, and this is a blast from the past. One of the things you're going to notice about this car is it doesn't feel anywhere near as rigid in terms of the chassis as the modern WRX or the modern Impreza for that matter, but it is surprisingly well dampened, even with the STI struts and springs. This car feels better than a lot of modern cars do over bad pavement like this. It isolates you really well. You can feel every corner of the car working well, but this is definitely more of a noisy interior cabin than a lot of the modern cars. It's, you know, you can tell NVH and isolation and interior quietness wasn't one of their top priorities back in the day. So let's talk about some of the performance. This is a 15-year-old car, so you would expect it to be pretty dated. So let's take it through some of the turns and see how this manages. It's definitely more softly sprung than the modern cars. You can feel a lot more body roll in the car. There's a lot more compliance, but there's two things that stand out that are surprising. One is just how well the shifter mechanism is set up on here. You forget, and you have to get in a car like this from the 90s or early 2000s before everything went to cable actuated manual transmission shifters. This has a mechanical linkage. There's no cables, it's rod shifted, and it feels so good and direct. And it feels like the transmission's really a part of the car. They're not trying to isolate it. And that's one of the best parts. This is by far so much better than the modern shifters in the new Subarus. The second thing is, you know, hydraulic power steering. While it can be bad in some of the older cars because a lot of it has to do with the steering ratio being so slow, the steering is far superior to the newer cars. Now, my only complaint with it is the alignment is not perfect on this car. It could use a really good alignment, and some of it could just be the slop and the bushings too from being an older car, but that's one area that I feel like you can definitely tell its age. And I can feel the rear brakes sticking a little bit. You know, it's just, again, it goes with the age. It's not going to be a new car with 160,000 miles. But let's take a look at the acceleration and see how this does on the STI motor. you know, aside from the squeal, aside from just the little nuances from the engine that you hear, feels a little strained. You can tell that maybe the tuning isn't as good as it should be. It might have a slight vacuum leak. It doesn't pull nearly as hard as the modern turbocharged cars, but really it doesn't need to. This feels so good in so many ways, where you can make the excuse for it with it being down on power. You don't really need a ton of power on a street car because it's doing so many other things for you. You have great visibility, you have simplicity, you know, the transmission feels really good. I would definitely take a little less horsepower for some of the refinement that's here from a mechanical perspective, and just the overall smoothness of the ride quality. Man, this transmission is just such a joy to shift. It's so much better than modern cars. You know, the motor, aside from some of its hesitation and its age, let's kind of take this through some of the turns again here and just see how it handles some of it. I think once you get used to the power delivery, it feels a lot more natural. I can tell it's just not as smooth as modern cars, but one of the biggest pros about this WRX, and like Tom says about it, you already know what's gonna go wrong with it. You have the ability of kind of knowing the past and what to expect, and that's something you don't get with the newer cars. The turn-in is really good. It doesn't have like really slow ratio steering where you have to cross over a lot. The ride quality is really good over the rough stuff. You know, it understeers, but it digs in, and just the body rolls there to help you get through the corner. It rolls and sets, and we talk about that a lot with like newer cars, like the Mazda Miata. It has a ton of body roll, but it's there by design. The car rolls, sets, and then grips. That's exactly what this WRX does. And even on these all-season tires, I mean, it's just a non-issue. It feels really good once you get used to how this handles. Yeah, this is a really good car. Now, yes, there's some arguments to be made here about, you know, what's better or what's worse. Modern cars are far more safer than they were in the early 2000s and 90s. The body structures are better, the overall chassis rigidity is better, the safety features are better on new cars, and you can't replace that here. There's no way you can modify this or fake it. That's kind of the downfall of this if you're somebody that is looking for that type of thing in a car. The second thing is you can't, you know, improve the body rigidity here. It does feel a lot more rubber bandish than the newer chassis do. The fuel economy is not as good here. And, you know, just the overall interior, the build quality, the NVH, that's something, you know, when we talk about these older cars, there's a lack of refinement that's here, because that, again, that wasn't an engineering priority with older cars. They were just trying to make them kind of simple, functional, and focused on some of the driving dynamics. Whereas now people are a lot more fickle about, you know, what they can live with. If they hear a little bit of wind noise, they don't want the car. And it's just kind of boils down to what type of driver you are, what type of person you are, and what you value in a vehicle. And I think a lot of us that are a little bit older now, that have gone through the modification phases and all the crap that we went through with cars back in the day, you look at a lot of modern vehicles, and I don't want all the electronics, all the needless driver's aids. I don't need that here. I can see around me. I can look in my mirrors. I don't need all the electronics. I don't need the stress of wondering when any of that stuff's gonna break. And the question remains is, will a modern WRX from 2018 last for 15 years and have this level of just reliability, things that you easily can fix yourself, and you can drive this forever, assuming it's not going to rust out. And that's kind of the takeaway from this car specifically. And if you're in the market for a used car, definitely drive this and see what you think compared to the new cars, because there is a lot of good here that's better than the old, there's a lot of good here in the old car that's better than the new ones, and that's really surprising. Do you have any final thoughts about this generation car?
Yes. growing up, I used to have a lot of muscle cars, Novas, Chevelles, Pontiacs. It was just those cars were fun because they were simple, they were super simple, and they just had high horsepower engines, and it was just a fun car. Nothing in the 80s was like that. 90s, you could kind of find something, but this is, I think, one of the last cars, I guess you could say, that was muscle car based. You have a simple design, you put a high horsepower engine in it, very basic interior, and it's a fun car. And no company is doing that anymore. Every fast car they want to sell for as much money as possible, with as many gadgets inside as possible, and it pisses me off. And I think that's why I like this car so much. It's a muscle car, I'd say.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. That's funny because we're gonna actually have a video planned about how cars peaked in the 90s, basically. Development peaked in the 90s. Yeah. So that's kind of right on the same mindset that we're going to be talking about. But let's take a look at the 2018 WRX, Tom.
All right.